Hi, I'm Aurel Enriquez, and this presentation contains our discussion on Chapter 1 of Mahon Diagnostic Microbiology, which talks about the bacterial cell structure, physiology, metabolism, and genetics. Here is the outline of our discussion, wherein we would first have an overview of the microbial world. So, aalamin po natin ano ba yung iba't ibang mga microorganisms that is present in our environment and that could possibly cause disease to humans. Next is classification and taxonomy, where we would be able to describe microbial classification and accurately apply the rules of scientific nomenclature for bacterial names. Next is bacterial morphology, where we would contrast prokaryotic and eukaryotic cytoplasmic and cell wall structures and their functions. And also, we will be talking about the difference between gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria, again, in terms of structure. Next is microbial growth and nutrition. So for this one, we should be able to describe the nutritional requirements for bacterial growth and other atmospheric requirements for the optimal isolation of these organisms. Next, we'll be talking about the different stages in the growth of these different bacteria, which is known as the bacterial growth curve. Next is bacterial biochemistry and metabolism, where we would be able to find out or learn about the different types of fermentation and oxidation. And lastly, we'll talk about bacterial genetics, wherein we would learn the development and transfer of antimicrobial resistance within or among bacterial organisms. Let's proceed with the overview of the microbial world. First up, we have bacteria, where its study is known as bacteriology. So ito po yung focus natin for this semester or for microbiology 1. We will be mainly studying clinical bacteriology. So bacteria are described as unicellular organisms that are classified as prokaryotes. So unicellular meaning isang organism po is composed of only one cell. Okay, that one cell is already enough to say that this is one living organism. Unlike us humans, for example, diba? We're composed of these many different types of cells for us to be able to function and be considered as a living organism. But it's not like that for bacteria. Again, isang cell lang po. No, that's all they need for us to be able to tell that they are one living organism. So they are prokaryotes. So prokaryotes in general po, they are described as organisms who lack a nucleus and other organelles. So listed here are all the other organelles na wala ang mga prokaryotes. So they don't have a nuclear membrane, they don't have a true nucleus, they also don't have mitochondria, endoplasmic reticulum, and Golgi bodies, which again is present in the cells of other living organisms, di ba po? So ayan, again, that's for bacteria. Up next are parasites, which are eukaryotic organisms that live at the expense of their host. Okay, so the study of parasites is referred to as parasitology. So a breakdown po natin itong dalawang descriptions na to. When we say eukaryotic, they are composed of cells that have all those other organelles na na-describe natin kanina na hindi available sa mga prokaryotic cells like bacteria. Next, when we say that they are parasite, it means that there are organisms that live at the expense of their host. Okay? So, sila po yung mga types of organisms na may mga processes or may mga materials po na inaasa nila na makukuha nila or maperform nila once they have infected a suitable host. Okay? So, ayun po. Again, they are eukaryotic parasites. Now, some of them are microscopic unicellular. So ulitin natin, pag sinabi natin unicellular, one cell is already equal to one living organism. In this example, we have the protozoans. Okay, so ang mga protozoa po, an example of that would be from the Entamoeba species. Up next are multicellular parasites. So pag sinabi naman po natin na multicellular sila, they are composed of different cells that have different functions to create one organism. Okay, so in this example, we have the tapeworms, specifically those that are from the Taenia species. Next are fungi or fungal organisms, where their study is referred to as mycology. So this is a subject that we will be talking more about in the next semester. Okay, sa hiwalay na semester nyo po, mapag-aaralan ang mycology together with virology. So fungi, they are described to be heterotrophic eukaryotes. So when we say heterotrophic, they cannot produce all the nutrients that they need by themselves. So, kailangan po nila na ma-obtain yung nutrients that they require through absorption. Okay, so when we say heterotrophic eukaryotes, they can't produce all the nutrients that they need. And eukaryotes meaning they have all the other cell organelles that are not present among prokaryotes. So, ayun po, no, again, they obtain their nutrients through absorption. Imagine plants or trees, diba? Plants, they're capable of growing and acquiring nutrients when you put them in soil, because soil contains all the nutrients that they need, diba? So it's kind of like that for fungal organisms, only on a smaller scale, diba? On a microscopic scale. So these fungal organisms have to be placed in a culture media or on a host kung saan, ayun nga po, no, yung host nila or yung culture media nila, yun na rin po yung nutrient source nila. So they would acquire those nutrients via absorption. So most fungi are multicellular, all right? Many other fungi out in the environment are multicellular, meaning they require multiple different cells and that perform multiple different functions for them to be considered as one living organism, except for yeast, okay? So yeast are also a type of fungi that are unicellular. So ulitin natin, kapag sinabi po natin na unicellular, isang cell lang ay sapat na po para ma-consider sila as one living organism. Although there are two types of fungi, okay? Those that are referred to as molds and those that are called yeast. So one of the most well-known example of molds will be those from the Aspergillus species. And yeast, no, ang pinakilala na example po that are capable of causing infections to humans are from the Candida species. Although there may be some fungal organisms that are referred to as dimorphic. So when we say that they are dimorphic, they're capable of growing both at 22 degrees Celsius or at 37 degrees Celsius. So magkaiba po, no, kumbaga yung optimal growth temperature niya, kasi po sa magkaibang growth temperatures na yun, kaya niya ring mag-produce ng dalawang magkaibang forms. So for example, at 22 degrees Celsius, dimorphic fungi are capable of producing their mold form. Okay, so ibang type of fungi yon. But if we move them at 37 degrees Celsius, that's when we would be able to observe their yeast form. Alright, so magkaibang type of fungi din po yun, pero isang organism lang ang nagpo-produce nito depending on the growth condition. Alright, so again, kapag ganun po yung fungi na na-encounter nyo, ang tawag sa kanila ay dimorphic. Next are viruses, where their field of study is referred to as virology. So this is also a separate field of study na sa susunod na semester nyo na po mapag-uusapan. Alright? So viruses, they are small infectious particles, or actually they're the smallest infectious particles capable of causing infections to humans. Now, virus particles are visualized using an electron microscope. Alright? Hindi po natin kayang makita yung presence or yung structure po ng mga viruses using the regular bright field microscope that we are using. Kasi nga po, no, they are very small. They're much smaller than bacteria or than fungi. Alright? Also, no, hindi nabanggit dito kung ang viruses ba ay eukaryotes or prokaryotes. It's because they're classified as none of those two. Okay? So again, pagdating nyo po sa virology classes nyo, malalaman nyo po na they're literally just particles made up of protein and genetic material, and that's it. All right? They don't even have the components for them to be classified as eukaryotes. All right? So we're able to diagnose certain viral infections by observing cytopathic effects. All right. So cytopathic effects are changes among the cells that have been infected by viruses. All right. So as we can see right here, they could be changes in cell lines after a viral infection. So there are many different types of cytopathic effects. Pwede silang inclusion bodies, changes in the cell size and shape ng infected na host cell, or syncytium or multinucleated giant cells. So again, we will not be defining or discussing each of these kung ano bang difference and appearance nila. Because again, that's something that you will talk more about pagdating nyo po sa virology classes nyo. But for now, ayan nga po, just listed here are the different cytopathic effects that could tell us that a certain sample or cell line has been infected by a virus. So as we can see right here, nabanggit ko na kanina, they are neither prokaryotic or eukaryotic. They're simply made up of protein structures that have either DNA or RNA. Okay, may genetic material naman po ang mga viruses, pero either one of the two lang. Okay, so viruses could either have DNA structures or RNA, but not both of them. Okay, keep that in mind. Kasi 'di ba, for us prokaryotic organisms, no, such as humans, we could have both DNA and RNA within our cells, 'di ba? But again, for viruses, they're not capable of having both of those in one structure. All right. So they also don't have a cytoplasmic membrane. What they have are protein structures. All right. And they are considered as obligate intracellular organisms. So when we say obligate intracellular organisms, they're not capable of living outside of a host. Okay? So requirement po, no, hindi sila mabubuhay, hindi sila magre-replicate, no, hindi sila dadami kung hindi sila makakahanap ng suitable host nila. So eventually these viruses would fail to survive and multiply if they don't have their preferred host organisms. Okay, so again, that's what we mean when we say they are obligate intracellular organisms. They're not capable of doing anything if they don't find their preferred host. Let's now proceed with classification and taxonomy. So the term taxonomy came from two Greek words, taxis, which is arrangement, and nomos, which is law. So this is basically a law on the proper arrangement. All right. So this is the orderly classification of organisms into different categories. So those different categories are referred to as taxa. So these classifications are based on the similarities and differences in their genotypes and their phenotype. So ano ba ang meaning nun? Ano ba ang genotype and ano ba ang phenotype? Genotypes, no, as the name implies, gene or types, these are their genetic makeup. This is the combination of their genes. So literally, yung genetic traits po nila ang tinitignan dito kapag ang pinag-uusapan po natin ay genotypes. But when we say phenotypes, no, these are physical characteristics and other functional observations. So, dito po, kung sa genotypes, no, yung literal na sequence ng genes nila yung tinitignan natin, sa phenotypes naman po, these are the readily observable characteristics, alright? So, ano bang shape nila, ano bang size nila, ano bang color nila, and also kasama na rin po yung mga functional descriptions or observations natin, no? How do they metabolize this specific carbohydrate? How do they react to this specific chemical agent? So that's also a phenotype, all right? So again, that's the difference, no, between genotypes and phenotypes. Kapag genotypes, this is their genetic makeup. Kapag phenotypes po, this is their physical and functional characteristics. So again, the kind of like rule that we follow in taxonomy is based on both their genotypes and phenotypes. So in diagnostic microbiology, bacterial species are placed into three different categories: their family, their genus, and species. So bacterial families are pretty much similar to what you would think of actual human families. Okay? So, di ba, in your family, hindi lahat kayo magkakamukha, hindi lahat kayo pare-parehas ng ugali, may mga pinsan kayo na iba yung apelyido, di ba? But you're all in the same family, right? So let's keep using humans as a metaphor. So yung genus po, this is the equivalent of a person's last name. And their species is kind of like their first name. Okay, so again, genus, it's the same for all these bacterial species, but dun sa species name, dun sila magkakaiba-iba. So sometimes you could be more specific. You could have more than 3 categories kung yung organism po ay meron ding subspecies or biovariation. So biovar, when we say biovar, it means biological variant. Usually po, ang na-observe natin na biovariations is nagkakaroon sila ng biochemical and physiological differences. Next naman po, we may also have what are known as serovars or serotypes. Now, this is brought about by different surface antigens. So, maaaring parehas yung biochemical reactions nila, parehas yung physiological observations natin sa kanila. Pero, if we look at their surface antigens or yung mga structures po na kung saan magre-react yung immune system natin, nandoon yung difference. So, again, those are referred to as serotypes. And then for viruses, no, we may also have what are known as strains. All right. Also in bacteria, may mga strains din naman po. So ulitin po natin, no, when we say family, this is composed of multiple different species from multiple different genus. All right. So maaaring magkakaiba sila ng genus, but they still have some similarities. That's why they're in the same family. Next naman po, for genus, again, imagine niyo ito yung last name ng pamilya nyo. Tapos yung species po, yun yung parang first name or yung pinagkaiba-iba ng first name ng families ninyo. So again, that's for the species. We'll have more examples later, okay, para mas maintindihan nyo po. Again, there could be other types, no, within the same species, like subspecies, biological variants, or serologic types. Let's now talk about nomenclature. So nomenclature is what gives naming assignments to each organism. So on this slide, let's break down how to properly write a bacteria's name. Okay? So kung family po nila, yung isisulat natin, bacterial families usually end with the suffix -aceae. Okay? So for example, Vibrionaceae, Streptococcaceae. Alright? So itong family na to, they are composed of multiple different species or multiple different genera, pero ayun nga po, they have some similarities that has placed them, no, into a similar family or into one family. So again, kapag po nakita nyo na may Aceae sa dulo po nung binabasa nyo na pangalan, ang ibig sabihin family ng mga bacteria ang pinag-uusapan natin. Next naman po is their genus name. So their genus name should have its first letter capitalized and the entire name is italicized, as shown here in this given example. So right here, we have the Vibrio species and the Streptococcus species. Alright? So again, kung tinatype nyo po itong mga salita na ito, dapat naka-italicize sila at dapat naka-capitalize yung unang letter nila. Alright? So again, ang family ay Vibrionaceae at Streptococcaceae. Pero kapag genus na po ang pinag-uusapan, no, we have the Vibrio species and Streptococcus species. All right. After that, let's now look into the examples of species. All right. So dito po, no, for species, this comes after the genus. So mauuna muna yung genus name nila and then yung species name nila. So for this one, ang species name po ay wala ka nang kailangang i-capitalize. All right. All letters within the species name is in lowercase and it is italicized if you're typing it, but it is underlined if handwritten. Okay? So in this example, we have Vibrio vulnificus and we have Streptococcus pyogenes. All right? So in the coming weeks po, sa mga susunod na chapters po na pag-uusapan natin, malalaman niyo po, no, that there are many other species within this genus, diba? Like Vibrio parahemolyticus, Vibrio alginolyticus, diba? Vibrio cholerae, all right? For Streptococcus naman po, we have Streptococcus pyogenes, Streptococcus agalactiae, and other stuff like that, all right? So ayan po, no, again, you italicize these names when you are typing them, but when you are writing them, no, by your hand, then you should underline. Okay? So ayan po, this is the proper nomenclature, no, of different bacterial organisms. Ulitin po natin, kapag may Aciae, family ang binabasa mo. Kapag genus po, no, ayan, naka-capitalize yung first letter lang. And then kapag species na po, ang sinusulat or tinatype natin, either italicized siya when typing or underlined po when handwriting. And ulitin natin, kapag species name na ang isinusulat mo, hindi mo na kailangang i-capitalize yung first letter. Okay? Yung first letter lang po ng genus ang dapat naka-capitalize. So let's just quickly go through what phenotypes and genotypes are. So although na-explain ko na po ito kanina, magbigay tayo ng examples, alright? So phenotypes are the readily observable physical and functional features of an organism. So examples would be, or examples of phenotypic characteristics would include their macroscopic morphology. Okay, so ito po yung itsura ng mga bacteria once we grow them in a culture media. Phenotypic characteristic din po yung microscopic morphology nila. Okay? So you'll learn more about that kapag pinag-usapan na po natin yung staining. Sa staining po, makakita tayo ng iba't ibang color ng bacteria depending on whether they are gram-positive, gram-negative, acid-fast, or modified acid-fast. No? Pero yung observations po natin after they have been stained, that's also considered as a phenotypic characteristic. Alright? So, ayan po. Kasama na rin po doon kung may ma-observe tayo na cell appendages, inclusions, and other stuff like that. Even their nutritional requirement is a form of phenotypic characteristic. No? Kung kailangan ba nila ng supplementation ng or kailangan ba ng increased amount ng carbon dioxide, kailangan ba nilang ma-supplement ng hemin or hematin, do they prefer colder temperatures? Will they grow better without the presence of oxygen? So ayun po, no, those are examples of phenotypic characteristics. And even their resistance or susceptibility to certain antibiotics or chemicals are part of their phenotypic characteristics, 'di ba? Kasi madali lang naman para sa atin na i-observe 'yon. 'Di ba? Itong bacteria na 'to, i-expose mo sa ganitong antibiotic, mag-grow ba siya o hindi, 'di ba? That's readily observable. Next po, kung i-expose natin siya sa ganitong concentration of oxygen, mag-grow ba siya o hindi? So we could also observe that easily, 'di ba? So again, those are phenotypic characteristics. All right? Next naman po is their genotype. So again, genotype is the genetic makeup of an organism. Hindi to basta-basta na-observe unless you perform gene sequencing. Alright? So the genotype is how their DNA or RNA strands are arranged in a sequence. And yung genotype po nila, ito rin po yung nagde-determine ng relatedness ng bawat isang bacterial species. Alright? Which is how scientists were able to group them into different families or into different genera. Okay? So I hope by now naintindihan nyo na po, no, kung anong pinagkaiba ng phenotypes and genotypes. Again, phenotypes are the readily observable physical or functional characteristics, yung mga bagay na kaya nating i-observe kapag may ginawa tayong procedure sa mga organisms na to in the laboratory versus genotypes. So yung literal na genetic sequence nila if we perform any sort of gene sequencing, which again is not readily observable, right? Let's now talk about the different types of cell walls, starting off with gram-positive cell walls. So gram-positive cell walls have a very thick peptidoglycan or murine layer, as you can see right here in this illustration. So this peptidoglycan layer is made up of alternating or paulit-ulit po na chains ng N-acetyl D-glucosamine or NAG and N-acetyl D-muramic acid or NAM. Okay, so again, alternating chains, paulit-ulit po na chains or structures ng NAG and NAM. Now, because the peptidoglycan layer is the primary component of the gram-positive cell wall, many antibiotics such as penicillin are effective against these gram-positive organisms kasi po, ang mode of action ng penicillin is to prevent the synthesis of the peptidoglycan layer. Next are gram-negative cell walls. So gram-negative cell walls, they have a thinner peptidoglycan layer, again, in comparison to gram-positive bacteria if we look at this illustration right here. So they have a thinner peptidoglycan layer, and on top of that, they have an outer membrane that's mainly composed of lipopolysaccharides or LPS. Okay, so ulitin po natin, no? For gram-positive bacteria, makapal yung peptidoglycan layer at wala ng outer membrane. But for gram-negative bacteria, mas manipis yung peptidoglycan layer tapos may outer membrane pa sa labas. And again, do not forget, this outer membrane is composed of lipopolysaccharides. Alright? So they also have this periplasmic space. If you look at this illustration, they have a periplasmic space which serves as the location for peptidoglycan synthesis. Alright? So, dito po, hindi masyadong effective or maybe not at all against gram-negative organisms ang mga penicillin and other similar antimicrobials against gram-negative organisms because they have this lipopolysaccharide outer membrane that is covering their murine or peptidoglycan layer. Alright? So, ulitin po natin, no? Ang mga penicillins po at mga antimicrobials with a similar structure or similar mode of action, hindi sila magiging effective sa mga gram-negative bacteria. Kasi po, yung peptidoglycan layer ng mga gram-negative bacteria ay natatakpan pa ng lipopolysaccharides. Alright? Hindi katulad ng mga gram-positive bacteria, mas effective sa kanila yung penicillin. Kasi walang takip, no, walang outer membrane yung murine layer nila, no, and also it has a much thicker layer of ayun po, NAM and NAG. Right? So that's their main difference, no? That's the main difference between the structure of gram-positive cell walls and gram-negative cell walls. On this slide, we have another illustration comparing a gram-positive and gram-negative cell wall. Again, their main difference is that gram-positive cell walls have a much thicker peptidoglycan layer, while gram-negative cell walls have way thinner peptidoglycan layer, pero mayroon silang extra na lipopolysaccharide outer membrane on top. So this is just another illustration to hopefully help you understand or visualize kung ano po yung pinagkaiba nila. Upon microscopic examination, ito na po yung magiging itsura ng mga gram-positive bacterial cells which are purple compared to gram-negative bacterial cells that turned out to be really dark pink or almost red in appearance. So as we proceed with other discussions, no, mas pag-uusapan po natin yung process ng gram staining. Sa slide na ito, pinapakita lang po kung ano ang pinagkaiba ng gram-positive and gram-negative cell walls after the process of gram staining. So again, gram-positive organisms are seen as purple, and then gram-negative organisms are pink or dark pink in appearance. Again, ma-observe lang to kapag nagawa mo na yung process of gram staining. So sa laboratory classes nyo po, dun yung mape-perform talaga at mas maiintindihan ang process of gram staining. Okay, so up next are acid-fast cell walls. Acid-fast cell walls are structured very much the same as gram-positive cell walls. Okay, ulitin po natin, may similarity po ang structure ng gram-positive cell walls at ng acid-fast cell walls. But here's the difference, no? They have an extra layer on top that is composed of mycolic acid. Alright, ulitin po natin, no? Acid-fast cell walls also have a very thick peptidoglycan layer na kahawig or kamukha ng mga gram-positive organisms. Pero may something extra sa ibabaw ng mga acid-fast cell walls. So again, they have these structures of mycolic acids on top. Alright? So examples of bacterial or bacterial genera, no, na acid-fast po ang kanilang cell wall would include the Mycobacterium species and the Nocardia species. Lastly, some bacteria such as Mycoplasma and Ureaplasma are unique in that they do not have cell walls. Alright? So may mga bacteria po na wala silang cell wall. Hindi sila classified na gram-positive, hindi sila classified na gram-negative, hindi rin sila makaklassify as acid-fast dahil wala nga sila nung lahat ng mga structure na yon na ina-identify natin as a cell wall. Alright? Now, what they have instead are sterols on their plasma membrane. Okay, so ulitin natin, no? Mycoplasma, Ureaplasma, and Acoliplasma species, they don't have cell wall structures. What they have are sterols. And because of this, they also do not have a specific shape of cell wall. All right? Pag wala kang cell wall, wala ka ring shape. All right? So they will now be referred to as pleomorphic. So since I've already mentioned about some bacteria not having a shape, let's now talk about bacterial morphology. Bacteria may vary in size and could occur in 3 basic shapes. So cocci, bacilli, and spirochetes. So cocci, these are round or spherical shaped bacteria. So some of them may be arranged by twos, and yun po yung tinatawag natin na diplococci. Okay, ulitin po natin kapag round or medyo spherical ang shape ng isang bacterial organism at naka-order or naka-arrange po sila na by twos, tigda-dalawa natin sila usually nakikita, ang tawag doon ay diplococci. Next, tetrads naman po ang tawag sa kanila kung by 4. Okay, kung 4 na cocci ang magkakasama or parang mukha silang magkakaduktong, ang tawag po doon ay tetrads. Next naman, if they are arranged in a cube-like formation, all right, they may be referred to as sarcinae. All right, sarcinae, if they are arranged in a cube-like formation, that may be composed of 8 hanggang 32 cells per cube, as we can see right here in this illustration. All right. Now, if the cocci is simply clustered together, no, magkakasama lang sila, magkakadikit lang sila, ito po yung usual arrangement ng staphylococci and ng micrococci. Right? So, ulitin po natin, no, for cocci-shaped or spherical-shaped bacteria that is arranged in clusters, we usually observe that for the Staphylococcus species and Micrococcus species. Now, if these cocci, no, they are stuck in a straight line or kind of like in chains, no, magkakasunod sila or parang nakapila sila, no, then they're most likely streptococci. Alright, so ulitin po natin. If the organism is arranged by 2 at ang shape niya ay cocci, ang tawag dun ay diplococci. Kapag they are arranged in 4, they are referred to as tetrads. Next naman po, if they are arranged in a cube-like formation, ang tawag doon ay sarcinae. At kapag yung mga cocci naman po ay clustered together lang, no specific arrangement, they're just in a bunch together. Those are observed among staphylococci and micrococci. Pero kapag po itong mga cocci-shaped bacteria na to ay naka-arrange in a line or in a chain, ang tawag na doon ay streptococci or na-observe siya among streptococci. Alright? Up next naman po are bacilli. So bacilli are rod-shaped. So mas elongated po yung itsura nila. So some bacilli may appear slightly rounded, no? Kapag medyo parang in between pa siya ng bacilli or ng cocci, no? Medyo round pa yung appearance niya pero medyo pahaba na rin siya. Ang tawag po doon ay cocobacilli. Alright? Now, if the bacilli are arranged side by side, no, ito po yung tinatawag na palisades. Alright? Palisade arrangement if they are lined together side by side. Alright? So, bacilli such as the Vibrio species naman po, they are known as curved bacilli. So, they are longer, they are rod-shaped, they are elongated, pero medyo may curve po yung itsura nila. So, again, we usually observe that among the Vibrio species. So their cells look like they're a little bit bent. Alright? So ayun po. Some bacilli may be spore-forming. Okay, so mayroon po silang enlargement at different parts of the cells. So as we go through the semester po, matututunan natin kung sino specifically yung mga bacterial species that could produce spores. But again, ayan po, no, we also have bacilli or rod-shaped bacteria that are referred to as spore-forming. So iba rin po yung itsura nila. Next, as the name implies, no, spirochetes are spiral shaped. They are coiled or they are curly, as you can see right here in this illustration. All right. Additional terminology lang po, no, additional terminology. Some bacteria, all right, some bacteria po, they may also be described as fusiform, meaning their ends are tapered, giving them a pointy appearance. Okay, ulitin po natin kapag sinabi nating fusiform, medyo matalim or patusok po yung magkabilang dulo ng bacterial cell na ito. Alright? And kapag sinabi naman po natin na pleomorphic ang isang bacteria, it means that they don't have a definite shape. No? Hindi natin siya maklasify as cocci, bacilli, hindi rin naman siya mukhang spirochete. So, ulitin natin, ang tawag na doon ay pleomorphic. Alright? So, if we're looking at the same organism pero iba-iba yung itsura ng cells niya, then ayun nga po, ulitin natin, ang tawag na doon ay pleomorphic. At nabanggit natin kanina, for bacteria that don't have a cell wall, usually kapag wala silang cell wall, wala din silang definite structure, so wala silang shape. So doon po, magagamit din natin yung description na pleomorphic. So ulitin ko yung statement na yon, bacteria that do not have a cell wall usually appear to be pleomorphic. All right. So ayun po, no, I hope you understood the differences between the different types of bacterial shapes. So cocci are spherical or round. Bacilli are rod-shaped or they're a bit more elongated. Spirochetes are literal spirals or curls. No? Fusiform means they have tapered ends, matalim or pointed yung magkabilang dulo ng bacteria na to. And when we say pleomorphic, they don't have a certain shape. Let's now talk about the different surface polymers and cell appendages na pwede nating ma-observe after staining our samples. Just a side note, no, I keep talking about staining. Just to give you an idea, wala pong color ang mga bacteria. Okay, walang color ang bacteria if we observe them microscopically. Although some of them are capable of producing pigments, ma-observe na lang natin yung mga pigmentation na yun kapag ginugrow na natin sila in culture at yung macroscopic appearance yung ino-observe natin. But again, microscopically, these bacteria do not have any color. Alright? Kaya kailangan natin silang i-stain. No, we need to apply different staining techniques onto them para ma-observe po natin lahat nitong mga structures na pinag-uusapan po natin. Okay? So first, they may have a capsule. A bacterial capsule is an organized material that is firmly attached to the cell wall. So capsules are made up of polysaccharide polymers, and these could protect the bacteria by providing it with a virulence factor, which helps the bacteria avoid phagocytosis and resist desiccation. So in the next chapters po, or as we proceed no with this semester, matutunan din po natin kung alin-alin yung mga bacteria that are encapsulated. And again, paano nakakatulong itong capsule na to para iwasan nung bacteria yung immune system natin. Alright? Next, there's this other thing that is referred to as the slime layer. So, para din pong capsule ang mga slime layer because they're both made of polysaccharides. But they actually are more loosely attached onto the cell wall. Alright? Hindi masyadong nakakapit or nakaduktong itong mga slime layer na to dun sa cell wall. Hindi katulad ng capsule. Capsules are very firmly attached onto the cell wall. But again, they are both made up of polysaccharides. And kaya niya rin pong tulungan yung bacteria to prevent phagocytosis. Alright? But aside from that, they also aid in the adherence of the bacteria to the host tissues or other materials such as synthetic implants. So again, as we proceed through this semester, malalaman nyo po no, na may mga bacteria na medyo mas may predilection or they prefer more to stick to areas na may mga plastic or synthetic implants and other places like that. So again, kagagawan po yun, no, ng pagkakaroon nila ng slime layer. On the next cell appendage, some bacteria may have a flagella, all right? So flagella, these are exterior protein filaments that can move, rotate, or turn, resulting in the bacteria to be motile, all right? So basically, yung flagella po ay nakakatulong para makakilos or makagalaw po ang mga bacterial organisms na to. May iba't ibang arrangement din po ang mga flagella. Now, if the bacteria doesn't have any flagella, then ang tawag po sa kanila ay atricus. Alright, ulitin po natin, if the bacteria does not have a flagella, then they are referred to as atricus. Now, if it has only one, no, may isang flagella siya, then it would be referred to as monotricus. Alright? Now, if the bacteria has one or the bacilli in this case, no, nakikita natin, bacilli-shaped bacteria po, yung tinitignan natin dito. If a bacilli has one flagella on each end, no, sa magkabilang dulo may tig-isa siya, then ang tawag na po natin doon ay amphitricus. Alright, ulitin natin, if a bacteria has one flagella on either end, no, then ang tawag natin doon ay amphitricus. Next, if a bacteria has multiple flagella on one or both of their ends, no, parang pom-pom, no, may marami siya sa magkabilang dulo, then ang tawag na po natin dito ay Lophotrichus. Alright? So, although in some reference po, kapag both ends ay merong multiple flagella, it may also be referred to as Cephalotrichus. Pero on Mayhon po, mas madalas kasi natin ginagamit yung term na Lophotrichus. Alright? So, ulitin po natin, kapag isa lang, sa isang side lang, ang tawag doon ay monotrichus. Kapag magkabila, meron siya, ang tawag doon ay amphitricus. Kapag multiple yung meron siya sa isa o magkabilang side, ang tawag na doon ay Lophotrichus, or kapag magkabilang side po, Cephalotrichus. As you can see right here in this illustration. Alright? Kapag naman po, the entire surface of the bacterial cell is covered by flagella, no? Wala nang magkabilang end. Lahat, kahit saan ka tumingin, may flagella siya, then that's referred to as peritrichus. Alright? If it's completely covered by flagella, peritrichus po ang bacteria na to. Alright? Next naman po is their pili or pilus, kung isa lang, no? But pili, these are non-motile, long or hollow protein tubes that can connect one bacteria to another for them to be able to exchange DNA. Alright? So, ayun po, no, ulitin po natin, pili, no, specifically yung conjugation pili po, no, they are hollow protein tubes kung saan pwede pong mag-transfer ng gene materials yung isang bacteria papunta sa isa ulit na bacterial cell. Alright? So, huwag pong kakalimutan yung term na yun, no? Mamaya po magagamit ulit natin yan when we talk about bacterial genetics. So again, the conjugation pili does not help with motility, but it is used during the transfer of genetic material. Alright? Next naman po is fimbriae. So fimbriae, these are proteinaceous hair-like appendages that are much smaller than pili and are responsible for adherence. Okay? So, ayun po, no, as we can see right here, yan po ang size differences nung tatlong nabanggit natin na cell appendage. Ulitin natin, no, flagella are large and they help with movement. Next naman po, no, pili, they are hollow tubes that are usually used for gene transfer, and fimbriae naman po is responsible for adherence. Okay, so again, those are the different cell appendages that we may be able to observe for some bacteria. Hindi po lahat ng bacteria ay mayroong ganito. Alright? So again, as we proceed with the next chapters, no, we'll find out sino-sino ba sa kanila yung mayroon ng mga structures na napag-usapan natin dito. On the previous slide, we talked about structures that could be found on the exterior of the bacterial cell. So let's now look into other structures that can be seen within the bacterial cytoplasm or cytoplasmic structures. First are inclusion bodies. Inclusion bodies are produced by some bacteria to serve as their energy source or food reserve, just in case mapunta po sila sa isang environment na wala masyadong mapagkukuhaan ng nutrients. So inclusion bodies, they can also help lessen osmotic pressure that may destroy the bacterial cells. So listed here are examples of polyphosphate granules as seen as inclusion bodies. So nag-iiba-iba po yung tawag sa kanila depending on which organism we would find them. Shown in this photo to the left is the Babes-Ernst granules or the metachromatic granules produced by Corynebacterium diphtheriae. So with the use of the Albert stain, ganun po yung itsura nila under microscopic examination. Next are endospores. So endospores are also known as asexual spores. On the other hand, these are small dormant structures inside of a cell that aids in the survival of the bacteria against external conditions. All right? So kung yung mga inclusion bodies po ay para kapag napunta sila sa isang lugar na walang source of nutrients, no, may baon sila na nutrients, yung mga endospores naman po ay kapag napunta sila sa lugar kung saan these places do not meet their preferred growth conditions. All right? So endospores are composed of calcium dipicolinate and they are located either terminally, which means sa pinakadulo ng bacilli, pwede rin naman pong subterminally, sorry, subterminally, so sa medyo dulo na po nung cell or centrally. So when you say centrally, the spore is located in the middle of the bacilli. So the photo on the left shows us terminally located endospores by Clostridium tetani. So notice, kapag sinabi natin terminal, nasa pinakadulo. So yung enlargement po kung saan nakalagay yung endospores, nandun sila sa pinakadulo nung bacterial cell. All right? So again, inclusion bodies serve as energy source or nutrient reserves. Meanwhile, endospores naman po are resistant and dormant structures. Now, before we get to the different staining techniques, ano nga po ba ang objectives of bacterial staining? Why do we do this? So first is to determine the morphology of the bacteria. Mas madali po nating ma-visualize yung shape, yung arrangement ng mga bacterial cells if we stain them first before viewing them microscopically. Dahil inuulit ko po, inherently wala pong color ang mga bacterial cells na ito. Okay? Some bacteria could produce pigments, but we only observe that upon macroscopic examination. So in microscopic examination, we need to stain them first before we're able to observe yung mga structures na napag-usapan natin sa previous slide. Another would be to identify organisms with special structures. So aside from the fact that bacteria could have different shapes, some bacteria may also have special structures. So there are some bacterial stains that could specifically be formulated for us to be able to visualize their structures. Halimbawa po, may special type of stain para ma-observe yung flagella. May special type of stain para ma-observe po natin yung metachromatic granules. Okay? So, ayun po. Now, before we look into what these special structures are, let's first discuss what are the different staining techniques that could be performed in the laboratory. So first up is simple staining, which makes use of only one stain. Okay, ulitin po natin sa simple staining, isang type of stain lang ang kailangan at ang gagamitin natin. So an example here is methylene blue and also crystal violet staining as shown here in these photos. All right. So ayan po, regardless of which organism is present in the sample, they will all look the same and have the same color. Pero at least po, no, nakita natin dito yung shape nila. So simple staining, it's only directed towards coloring the forms and shapes of the cells. Okay. Next is differential staining. So this is a technique, no? This is the technique that we usually perform in the laboratory, okay? Yung mga techniques po na gagawin nyo sa inyong laboratory classes, those are examples of differential staining. So this method aims to differentiate bacteria into separate groups. So for example, sila ba ay gram-negative or gram-positive? Sila ba ay acid-fast or non-acid-fast? May difference po yung mga yon, kaya differential staining ang gagamitin natin. So dito na po natin magagamit yung techniques on differential staining. There are four main steps. No? There are four main steps as we can see right here. So first is applying the primary stain. Alright, so sa primary stain po, after we let that sit for a while, we wash it off and apply the mordant. Ang mordant po, sa kahit anong method of differential staining, this is usually not actually a stain, but rather this is a substance or a step that could increase or strengthen the binding of the primary stain to the bacterial cells. Okay, so pinapatibay po nito yung pagkapit ng primary stain dun sa organisms na dapat niyang kapitan depending on the organism structure. All right, so that's the purpose of the mordant. After that, we'll also let that soak for some time, and then we wash it off and we proceed to applying the decolorizer. All right, so yung decolorizer po, it's supposed to remove the color on the cells that inherently do not have the structure para i-retain yung kulay ng primary stain. You might be very confused as I discuss this right now, pero mas pag-uusapan nyo pa po ito sa laboratory classes nyo. General discussion lang po itong ginagawa ko for differential staining. Alright, so after that, no, after decolorizing, mawawala yung color ng primary stain dun sa mga bacteria na hindi naman fit yung structure para i-hold yung primary stain. Alright? So after washing that off, we finally apply the secondary stain. Alright? So the secondary stain, this is more commonly referred to as the counter stain. So taking, for example, the process of gram staining, kung gram positive po yung organism, then hindi mawawala sa kanila yung primary stain. Alright? Pero kung gram negative yung bacteria dun sa sample ninyo, then after applying the mordant, no, hindi ito magiging effective at madidecolorize pa rin sila pag in-apply mo na yung decolorizer mo. Pag in-apply mo na yung decolorizer mo, may space na para kumapit naman yung counter stain. And doon na po natin yung makikita yung difference, no? Gram-positive cell walls will be purple dahil kumapit yung color ng primary stain, and then gram-negative cell walls would appear pink or dark pink dahil ang kumapit sa kanila ay yung kulay ng counter stain. So yun po yung differences ng mga bacterial organisms na to depending on the structure of their cell wall. So na-observe natin yun by differential staining. Alright, so ayun po. Examples of differential staining are shown here in these photos. So makikita po natin may mga organisms na, ayun nga po, no, dark purple in appearance, and then some of them look like they're pink or dark pink. Okay, so again, that's the outcome of differential staining. Makikilala natin itong mga organisms na to depending on their gram staining reaction. Just a review, no? Staining reactions, ano po ito? Are these phenotypic characteristics or genotypic characteristics? Ang staining reaction ba ay genotype or phenotype? The correct answer is, this is a phenotype. Okay, diba? Pag sinabi nating phenotype, these are readily observable features or descriptions. Diba po? So again, kapag genotype ito, hindi natin ito makikita basta-basta sa ganyan. Kailangan natin ng gene sequencing methods for us to know that. So again, gram staining reactions or other differential staining reactions is an example of a phenotype. Alright? Up next is negative staining. So negative staining, this is utilized to demonstrate the presence of capsules surrounding some bacteria or some fungi, as we can see here in this example. Alright, so kaya siya tinawag na negative staining ay dahil baliktad po yung nangyayari dito, no? Imbis na yung mga cells yung kukulayan natin, yung background po, yung magkakaroon ng dark color. And if there is a clear zone or halo that is surrounding these cells, then that indicates the presence that the organism has a capsule, diba? Kanina we talked about capsules, those structures that are firmly attached onto the bacterial cell that could provide virulence factors. So ayun po, na-visualize natin ang mga capsules na yon kung gagamitin natin ang negative staining. So kapag may clear or walang color na area sa paligid ng bacterial cell, that confirms the presence of a capsule. Alright, so examples of the negative staining technique would be the India ink or Nigrosin stain. But again, primarily ang India ink or Nigrosin stain po ay ginagamit for mycology. Let's talk more about gram staining. So gram staining was discovered by Danish scientist and physician Hans Christian Gram. Alright, so ang pangalan po ng procedure ay galing sa pangalan ng person na nakapag-formulate nitong method of staining ito. So again, it was Dr. Hans Christian Gram. Pero nung unang panahon po, isang stain lang yung gamit niya, which is aniline gentian violet, and they did not have a counter stain. So nung unang panahon po, ang gram staining is only a form of, anong tawag kapag isang stain lang yung gamit? It's only a form of simple staining, di ba? Nung unang beses na na-formulate tong method na to, hindi pa siya differential kasi isa lang yung stain na ginamit ni Hans Christian Gram. Alright? But as we've previously discussed, gram staining is a form of differential stain, which is utilized to differentiate bacterial cells based on their cell type and staining reaction. So eventually po, a counter stain was added into the procedure, and as the years went by, other stains were used together to create other methods of differential staining. So the first step is to take your colonies from your pure culture and make a smear. All right. So after spreading the colonies on the glass slide, you gently heat fix the smear by placing it above your flame source, either using an alcohol lamp or a Bunsen burner. And then make sure po na hindi masyadong matagal at hindi masyadong malapit dun sa flame source yung slide ninyo to avoid burning your smear. Okay, so if you burn your smear and destroy the bacterial cells, hindi na po magiging accurate yung staining results. Now, after heat fixing, ang primary stain po na gagamitin natin is crystal violet. So this would give the cells a deep purple color. All right, so let that soak for exactly 1 minute, right? 1 minute lang, and then rinse with water. All right. Next is to apply the mordant. Now, the mordant, which in this procedure would be grams iodine. So, na-mention na po ito, diba, that the mordant is not actually a stain. Hindi siya nagbibigay ng color, but it is a substance that could form an insoluble complex by binding to the primary stain, thus strengthening the bond of the primary stain to the bacterial cell wall, which in simpler terms, mas pinapatibay nito ang pagkapit ng crystal violet dun sa mga gram-positive na cell wall. So we also let that sit for exactly 1 minute before rinsing with water. Now, the next step is to decolorize with 95% ethyl alcohol. And if a bacterial cell is gram-negative, meaning yung cell wall structure niya, hindi niya kayang i-hold yung primary stain, then madidissolve pa rin po yung dye and mordant complexes that has been formed nung nilagay nyo yung grams iodine. So only the cells that would remain purple are those that are gram positive, as shown here in this figure. Alright? So ayan po, 30 seconds lang po dapat ina-apply yung decolorizer. So sometimes po kasi, even less kung nakikita nyo po na visually nawawash out na yung color kasama nung decolorizer. And again, we'll rinse that with water. By the way, ang nilagay ko po dito ay distilled water, no? Pero in most laboratories, no, in actual setup, sometimes some places also are still make use of tap water. Minsan okay lang naman po gumamit ng tap water sa gram staining. But ideally, sana distilled po ang ginagamit natin. Alright? Last step in gram staining is applying safranin. Safranin is the counter stain. So, lahat po ng cells na hindi kinapitan ng crystal violet after decolorizing, kakapitan naman po ito ngayon ng safranin. So, we'll also let that soak for a minute and then wash it off with water. Alright? So, you can let your smear air dry, or you could also blot with a clean tissue paper. Just make sure to just lightly tap the slide with the tissue and don't actually wipe off the water. Kasi po, baka sumama yung mismong smear ninyo, no? Sayang, ang dami nyo ng steps na nagawa, tapos napunasan nyo lang sila. Alright, so be very gentle with when drying your slide. Alright? So, ayan po. And ayan, may video naman po tayo na ma-share, no? Maaaring ma-upload to sa Canvas modules natin. So you could view the step-by-step process of gram staining. And of course, no, in your own laboratory classes, no, sa sariling laboratory classes nyo po, your professor would also give you a demonstration on how to properly perform gram staining. And eventually, kayo rin po, no, matatry nyo rin po na gawin itong process of gram staining. But at least now, no, through this lecture, you now have the general idea on how gram staining would work and how it is performed. Next is acid-fast staining, where there are 3 different methods. So, unahin po natin yung Ziehl-Neelsen or hot method. So, Ziehl-Neelsen, this is the oldest acid-fast staining procedure. Its primary stain is carbolfuchsin, which would stain the acid-fast cells red. Okay? So, after flooding the slide with carbolfuchsin, iinit nyo po yung slide ninyo. So, bali, yung heat, yun na po yung magiging mordant. Alright? So, we'll heat the slide only until we notice that the carbolfuchsin is starting to steam. Alright? So, kailangan nyo pong bantayan ng mabuti kung umuusok na ng kaunti yung slide. So be careful not to actually boil the stain, otherwise this may affect the overall result. Then we'll leave that to soak for approximately 5 to 10 minutes, and then after that we'll rinse it off with distilled water. Now, kung sa gram staining po, nabanggit natin kanina na okay lang gumamit ng tap water, dito po for acid-fast staining, we strictly use distilled water to avoid contaminating the smear with tap water bacillus. Okay? So pagdating nyo po sa chapter 26 classes ninyo or chapter 26 lessons ninyo, matututunan nyo po na meron din palang mycobacteria that could be found in tap water. Alright? So in acid-fast staining, to avoid a false positive result via contamination, we only use distilled water. Now for the decolorizer, instead of just plain 95% alcohol, we use a solution that has also the addition of 3% hydrochloric acid. Kaya siya tinatawag na acid alcohol. Alright, so again, 95% ethyl alcohol plus 3% hydrochloric acid equals acid alcohol. At yun na po yung ginagamit natin as a decolorizer for acid-fast staining. And finally, for the counter stain, we add the methylene blue counter stain and we leave it for only 5 seconds. All right, 5 seconds lang po, and then we rinse it off with distilled water. So as usual, you allow your slide to air dry or gently blot the slide with a clean tissue paper. And there you have it. No, that's how you would be able to perform acid-fast staining. All right. So after that, you observe your slides microscopically, and acid-fast cells would appear red dahil red ang carbolfuchsin, while the non-acid-fast cells would be blue. All right? So ayan po. Next, we also have the Kinyon or the cold method. So almost all of the steps is the same as the hot method, pero dito po yung carbolfuchsin may halo na siya na tergitol, and the tergitol is what would serve as a mordant. So heating is no longer necessary. Alright? So heating is no longer necessary using the Kinyon stain, kaya siya tinawag na cold method. And usually po, methylene blue din yung counter stain sa Kinyon, pero pwede rin naman maging malachite green. No? Malachite green as an alternative counter stain for Kinyon stain. Last one is the modified acid-fast stain. So the modified acid-fast stain has been developed for the detection of Nocardia species. Pwede rin po itong gamitin for Legionella myctidae and the oocyst of Cryptosporidium. Alright, so may mga specific organisms po na pinaggagamitan natin ng modified acid-fast stain. Alright, so ayun po. So for this one, the decolorizer in the modified acid-fast staining is a bit milder, so we make use of the aqueous sulfuric acid. Now, in your laboratory classes po, most likely ang ipaperform nyo lang po ay yung Ziehl-Neelsen method or yung hot method. So again, for now, diniscuss lang muna natin yung general steps and procedures for Ziehl-Neelsen staining, pero in your laboratory classes, you would actually be able to perform the hot method of acid-fast staining. Our reference textbook also mentions the usage of acridine orange. Now, acridine orange is a fluorochrome dye, and fluorochrome dyes work by absorbing light of a specific wavelength, and then it would re-emit that light at a longer wavelength, allowing for visualization under a fluorescence microscope. So usually po, ang acridine orange and other types of fluorescent dyes, we don't make use of this kung ang mayroon ka lang ay bright field microscope. Alright? Ulitin po natin, acridine orange and other forms of fluorescent staining is only used if you have a fluorescence microscope. Now, acridine orange has the capability to stain both gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria, and this is usually used for locating bacteria in some blood cultures. Next is chalcofluor white, which is also a fluorochrome dye. Now, the main component of the cell wall na tinatarget ng chalcofluor white is chitin. Now, chalcofluor white would be able to produce either an apple green or blue-white fluorescence depending on which filter is being used dun sa fluorescent microscope nyo. We don't usually use chalcofluor white in bacteriology. This is mostly used in mycology. Next is Corynebacterium diphtheriae. This may be used for the visualization of the metachromatic granules of Corynebacterium diphtheriae, but may iba pa po kasing stains no, na mas okay or mas preferred to visualize these metachromatic granules. But again, one of our options to view the metachromatic granules of Corynebacterium diphtheriae is methylene blue. And of course, nabanggit na kanina, methylene blue is also usually used as a counter stain for acid-fast staining. Next is lactophenol cotton blue, which is abbreviated as LPCB. This is commonly used in mycology, so we will not be discussing this for today. All right, but again, no, lactophenol cotton blue, this is used for the visualization of fungal organisms. Next is India ink, which is a form of negative stain. So we already talked about this earlier, di ba po? When we say negative stain, yung background, yung lalagyan natin dark color, and then the cells that we are observing would be colorless, which in this case, it's typically used for the observation of capsules of Cryptococcus neoformans, which is a fungal pathogen. So we won't be using India ink here in bacteriology laboratory because this is mostly used in mycology. We also have endospore staining, and the most well-known example for this is the Schaefer-Fulton spore stain. Now, this has malachite green as the primary stain and safranin as the counter stain. So as we can see right here in this photo, the bacterial cells are red or pink in appearance. Meanwhile, the endospores or yung structure na gusto nating ma-observe, they are green because the primary stain is malachite green. So basically, ang tinatarget po ng primary stain ay yung structure na gusto nating ma-observe, which again, in this case, is the endospores. So that's for the Schaefer-Fulton spore stain. Shown here are all the other different special staining methods. Hindi na po natin to mape-perform sa laboratory classes natin dahil hindi rin naman sila commonly performed in the laboratory for diagnostic purposes. No? So, right here in the first column, we have the staining technique. Next, ano yung primary stain or the types of stains that is used. Alright? And next, ano ba yung bacterial structure na tinatarget nitong mga staining methods na to. So there are a lot. But again, we will not be able to perform all of this in our laboratory classes. So for this one, aralin na lang po. Depending on the type of stain, ano yung structure na tinatarget nila. Let's now proceed to microbial growth and nutrition. For their energy source, some bacteria may be like plants, so they use light as their energy source. So ang tawag natin sa kanila ay phototrophs. Other bacteria may rely on chemical reactions, specifically oxidation. So kapag nagkakaroon po ng oxidation, doon sila nakakakuha ng energy from the oxidation of either organic or inorganic compounds. And we would call them chemotrophs. Okay? Now, for their carbon source, for the carbon source, some bacteria po na carbon dioxide lang sapat na, no? They use carbon dioxide as their sole source of carbon, and they are referred to as autotrophs. Okay. Meanwhile, some bacteria, on the other hand, need organic molecules from other bacteria, and they are referred to as heterotrophs. Next is temperature requirement. So the optimum temperature for most pathogenic bacteria or yung mga bacteria po na nakakapagdulot ng sakit to humans is at 35 to 37 degrees Celsius. Now, karamihan naman po ng mga bacteria na maaaral natin, 35 to 37 degrees Celsius ang preferred incubation temperature nila. So, mapapansin nyo po sa laboratory classes nyo, all our incubators are set at 35 to 37 degrees Celsius yung internal temperature nila. Alright? So, they would fall under the category of mesophiles. Alright? Meanwhile, some bacteria can grow best at the 0 degrees Celsius. Alright? So, para sa kanila, no, sobra na yung 20 degrees Celsius. Okay? May mga bacteria po na mas prefer nila ang mas malamig na environment, and we would refer to them as psychrophiles or cryophiles. No, medyo maarte sila. Ang gusto nila malamig lang yung environment, di ba? So, an example of a psychrophile is Listeria monocytogenes. Ang Listeria monocytogenes po, kaya niyang mag-grow kahit nasa 4 degrees Celsius lang siya. Ang 4 degrees Celsius po, that's basically our refrigerator temperature, di ba? So, we could refer to Listeria monocytogenes as a psychrophile. Meanwhile, meron din naman pong mga bacteria that are thermophiles or hyperthermophiles, and they grow best at 50 degrees Celsius and up to 125 degrees Celsius. All right? So examples of thermophiles would be Thermus aquaticus. All right? So ang Thermus aquaticus po, dito nang galing yung Taq polymerase na ginagamit sa PCR for DNA sequencing, since they can stay active across a wide range of temperatures, and they are able to withstand protein denaturating processes that is necessary during PCR. So ulitin po natin, an example of a thermophile is the Thermophilus or the Thermus aquaticus. All right, sorry. Ulitin po natin yung example of a thermophile is Thermus aquaticus. All right, yung pinanggalingan ng Taq polymerase. Okay. Next is oxygen requirement. So various bacteria may be referred to as either aerobes, anaerobes, or microaerophiles. So aerobes or obligate aerobes require oxygen for growth, and the incubation environment must have approximately 15 to 21% oxygen. All right. For anaerobes naman, there are actually 3 different types of anaerobes: the obligate, facultative, and aerotolerant anaerobes. So obligate anaerobes will die after prolonged exposure to oxygen or air. So kapag nagko-collect po tayo ng mga samples suspected of harboring anaerobes, meron pong specialized transport and incubation system para sa mga organisms na to. Otherwise, mamamatay sila imbis na mag-grow dahil sensitive nga po sila sa presence of oxygen. So again, that's for the obligate anaerobes. Facultative anaerobes can grow whether or not there is oxygen, but they would grow better in the presence of oxygen. Alright, ulitin po natin yun. No? For facultative anaerobes, okay lang naman kung walang oxygen, mag-grow pa rin naman sila. Pero, ayun nga po, no? mas preferred nila or mas abundant pa rin yung growth nila, no? Kapag mayroong oxygen. Alright? So, those are the facultative anaerobes, and an example of that is Escherichia coli. Next are aerotolerant anaerobes. So aerotolerant anaerobes can survive in the presence of oxygen, but will be unable to perform metabolic processes. All right. So hindi sila mamamatay, but at the same time, they won't be able to do other things. Okay? So kung ikukumpara natin 'yon sa yung mga aerotolerant anaerobes sa mga obligate anaerobes, ang mga obligate anaerobes po, they will die if there is oxygen in the environment. Pero yung mga aerotolerant anaerobes, as the name implies, they can tolerate the presence of oxygen. Yun nga lang, hindi nila kayang gumawa ng kahit ano. So they can't acquire nutrients, they can't multiply, they're just alive, but they're not doing anything unless we move them in an environment with no more oxygen. All right? So ayun po, no, I hope you understood the difference between those three types of anaerobes. Next one po is microaerophiles. All right? So again, as the name implies, no, they only require a small amount of oxygen, approximately 2 to 10% oxygen lang po, no? So that's way below what aerobes would need, which is 15 to 21%, diba? So again, microaerophiles, they require oxygen, but only in small amounts, all right? So 2 to 10% oxygen lang po ang kailangan ng mga microaerophiles, all right? So an example of this is Campylobacter species, specifically Campylobacter jejuni, which would prefer only about 5 to 10% oxygen in its growth environment. All right, so those are the different types of bacterial organisms depending on their oxygen requirement. So now the next question might be, ano bang meron sa mga aerobes, 'di ba? Bakit yung mga obligate anaerobes mamamatay kapag na-expose sa oxygen? So anong special sa mga aerobes, 'di ba? This is because aerobic organisms can produce the enzymes catalase and superoxide dismutase. Alright? So, ulitin po natin, no, ang mga aerobes po, mayroon silang mechanisms or nakain lang mag-produce ng enzymes para hindi sila mamatay kapag na-expose po sila sa oxygen. At ulitin natin, ang dalawang enzymes na ito ay ang superoxide dismutase at ang catalase. Alright? So, catalase and superoxide dismutase are produced by obligate aerobes and facultative anaerobes. Okay, ulitin natin. Yung dalawang types of organisms na kaya mag-produce ng catalase at superoxide dismutase ay obligate aerobes at facultative anaerobes. Alright, so they are protective to the bacteria because they could counter the toxic effects of oxygen and other reactive oxygen species. So again, sa laboratory class nyo po, mas mapag-uusapan nyo itong pinakita natin na chemical reaction. Alright? But again, no, for you to understand paano ba nagsusurvive ang mga aerobes at mga facultative anaerobes kahit na-expose sila sa oxygen, ayan, it's because of those two enzymes, catalase and superoxide dismutase. Let's now proceed to those bacteria that require more carbon dioxide in their environment than usual. So capnophiles, they require a concentration of about 5 to 10% carbon dioxide for them to grow. An example of these would include Haemophilus influenzae. Haemophilus influenzae is a causative agent of meningitis in children. And also, kasama rin po sa listahan ang Neisseria gonorrhoeae. So, Neisseria gonorrhoeae is the causative agent of the sexually transmitted infection, gonorrhea. Alright? So, in this photo to the left is the candle jar. So, the candle jar can be used to incubate both capnophilic and obligate anaerobes. Next is pH requirement. The optimum pH for most pathogenic bacteria is at 7.0 to 7.5. So karamihan po ng mga bacterial na maaaral natin, 7 hanggang 7.5 po ang pH ng mga environment that they choose to grow in. So neutral lang. Okay? So they fall under the category of neutrophiles. Now, if they grow better at places with low pH, they're called acidophiles. And if they grow better at places with a much higher pH, then they are referred to as alkalophiles. Other terminologies that we need to be familiar with are halophiles and fastidious organisms. So halophiles thrive best in an environment with increased salt concentration. So example po nito, yung ibang mga Vibrio species. Okay, karamihan po sa mga Vibrio species, they could be recovered and isolated from bodies of salt water. Kapag sinabi naman po nating fastidious bacteria, they require a few other specific sources of nutrients such as additional amino acids, vitamins, or heme. So generally, mahirap pong magpatubo ng mga fastidious bacteria because they don't usually grow using routine culture media unless we supplement them with those specific nutrient sources. Let's now talk about the different types of growth media. There are many different types of growth media. So let's first talk about those that are based on their consistency. So ayan po, no, we have the liquid or broth media. So liquid or broth media contains no agar or gelatin in their formulation and should not solidify even after the mixture has cooled down. All right. So liquid or broth media are typically used to cultivate and maintain stocks of microorganisms. They're sometimes referred to as an inoculum, all right? So they are also referred to as culture broths, all right? Next are semi-solid media. So semi-solid media contains approximately 0.5 to 1% agar. So the medium doesn't fully harden in comparison to a solid media. So semi-solid culture media are usually needed for the observation of bacterial motility. Since yun nga po, hindi fully hardened yung medium and the bacterial growths have room to move outwards or away from the line of inoculation if they are in fact motile. So an example of this is the sulfide indole motility media or SIM and also yung MIO or the motility indole ornithine media. Okay, so again, examples po yan ng mga semi-solid media na 0.5 hanggang 1% agar lang ang component. Ulitin natin, mahalaga na semi-solid lang sila para makakilos po yung isang bacteria kung motile siya. Okay, just a quick recap. What are the appendages that could be used for motility? That's the flagella. Di ba po? Up next are solid media. So ito na po yung pinakakilala natin na mga agar plates and agar slant deeps. Alright, so these ones are composed of approximately 2 to 3% agar and they will definitely turn solid once they cool down to room temperature, which is why we need to work quickly and carefully when preparing solid media. Right, so examples of these would include the BAP or blood agar plate, the CAP or the chocolate agar plate, and the MAC or the McConkey agar plate. So ito po yung examples ng mga culture media na ipe-prepare natin no, sa following weeks in your laboratory classes. All right, you will also be able to experience, no, you will be able to learn how to prepare these solid media. All right. Other examples not mentioned here would include the TCBS or the thiosulfate citrate bile salt sucrose agar for the isolation and differentiation of Vibrio species, and also the MSA or mannitol salt agar, which is used in the isolation of methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. Okay, so lahat po na nabanggit ko, those are examples of solid media. Next classification of culture media is based on their usage. Alright? Ano ba ang gamit nila? Okay? So kung kanina, yung classification ng mga culture media na pinag-usapan natin ay based on consistency, no? Kung sila ba ay liquid, semi-solid, or solid, dito naman po, ano ang purpose nila? Kailan natin sila dapat gamitin? Okay? So first is the general purpose or the routine culture media. They are routinely used for almost any sample. And when I say any sample, maaaring bacterial or fungal. Okay? Kahit ibang types of organisms po pwede natin itong gamitin. They have no additional supplement. Wala silang additional nutrient source. So, hindi pwedeng mag-grow dito yung mga fastidious bacterial organisms because ano ulit ibig sabihin when we say fastidious? They require an additional nutrient source, which again, routine culture media do not have that. All right. So an example of this is the nutrient agar. Makikita natin sa pangalan niya, no, na ang pangalan niya ay nutrient agar. So yung basic nutritional components lang po ang meron ang nutrient agar. Okay, wala siyang special nutrients to grow the fastidious organism. So again, the general purpose or routine culture media is used for non-fastidious organisms. Okay? Next is the enriched non-selective media. Okay, i-breakdown natin yung dalawang descriptions na yun. Kapag sinabi nating enriched, may additional supplements na po siya. May additional nutrient sources na siya, such as blood, vitamins, yeast extract. Okay? So dito po, pwede na tayong magpatubo ng mga fastidious organisms. Okay? Ano naman ang ibig sabihin when we say non-selective media? When we say non-selective media, kaya nating magpatubo dito ng kahit anong organisms na ayun nga po no, that would be able to utilize this additional nutritional supplements pero wala tayong substance na magpe-prevent ng growth ng ibang organisms. Okay, we'll talk more about that later, no? Pero pag sinabi nating non-selective, it does not contain any substances that could prevent the growth of other unwanted organisms. Okay? So ayan po no, this has no inhibitory substances and could be used for fastidious organisms. So the most well-known example for this is yung BAP or blood agar plate and CAP or the chocolate agar plate. So sa laboratory classes nyo po, again, mas may explain pa po no, yung components ng BAP and CAP and may experience nyo rin po how to make these types of culture media. But again, they are referred to as enriched and non-selective media. Next are selective media. So ito na yung kabaliktaran ng isa, no? Selective media are incorporated with inhibitory substances. Ano bang examples ng inhibitory substances? They could be antibiotics, dyes, or chemical agents. So itong mga antibiotics, dyes, or chemical agents na to, ano ang purpose nila? Okay? So they inhibit the growth of other organisms while promoting the growth of desired organisms. Okay? So ulitin natin, kapag sinabing selective media, as the name implies, it selects kung ano lang yung organisms na papatubuin natin dito sa media na to. Okay? It inhibits or it prevents the growth of other unwanted organisms while allowing the growth of the specific organism that we hope to isolate. Okay? So again, that's for selective media. It only selects kung sino lang yung pwedeng tumubo. Okay? So examples of this would be the MAC or McConkey agar, the TMA or the Thayer-Martin agar, and the mannitol salt agar or MSA. Next are differential media. So this would allow the visualization of metabolic differences between some bacteria. Okay? So anong ibig sabihin nito? If an organism is capable of producing different biochemical reactions or different metabolic products, no, makikita natin yung pinagkaiba nun using this culture media. Alright? So let's say, for example, the MAC or the McConkey agar. No? One of the carbohydrate sources that is included in this is lactose. Alright? So dito po, no, as a differential culture media, makikita natin yung difference in growth between organisms that could ferment or utilize the lactose component versus organisms that cannot use the lactose dun sa culture media. Okay? Next is the blood agar plate. The blood agar plate po is differential in a way that this could help us visualize different hemolytic patterns. Okay? Pagdating nyo sa chapter 15, I think, which talks about Streptococcus species, and also, I think, chapter 8, the usage of colony morphology in differentiating different bacterial organisms. Dito nyo pag-uusapan na may mga bacteria po na kayang mag-hemolyze ng blood cells. Alright? And those different patterns of hemolysis are recognized with the usage of the blood agar plate. Okay. So now that we're here, no, since I've already been mentioning them in the previous slide, let's just quickly go through the different types of routine culture media na ginagamit natin in the laboratory and maaaring prepare nyo rin po in your upcoming laboratory classes. So first up is the blood agar plate or BAP. This may also be referred to as the SBA or sheep blood agar dahil usually po sheep's blood naman talaga ang ginagamit to create this culture media. So this is usually prepared by using the tryptic soy agar base. Alright, so gagamit ka ng TSA and then you add the 5% sheep blood. Alright, so again, the BAP is a general purpose, enriched, and non-selective medium. But this may also be classified as differential because we could classify the different bacteria based on their hemolytic patterns. There are actually 3, the alpha, beta, and gamma hemolysis. Alright. Now here's something that you need to remember when creating your blood agar plates. No, human blood is not preferred. Okay, hindi ideal na human blood ang gamitin natin for the creation of our blood agar plates for 2 reasons. All right. First, it may increase the possibility of exposure to human blood-borne pathogens. All right. So kung mayroon mang infection or any pathogenic material dun sa source natin ng human blood na gagamitin mo para gawin yung blood agar plate, ayun nga po, it increases your risk of acquiring those infections. Next is that they may contain antibiotics, antibodies, or other anti-infective agents. Okay, hindi natin alam, maaaring yung source mo ng blood sample mo ay nagtitake ng antibiotics ang individual na to, or mayroon na silang antibodies against these certain infections or other anti-infective agents that are produced by our immune system. So, what's wrong with that? Bakit hindi sila pwedeng gamitin? Baka po kasi, no, imbis na ma-enrich niya yung culture media natin, ay mas lalo pa niyang ma-prevent yung growth ng organisms. Kasi available yung mga bagay na yan dun sa human blood source mo. Okay, so again, the blood agar plate is usually composed of 5% sheep's blood. Human blood is not preferred. Up next is the chocolate agar plate or CAP, or also abbreviated as CHOC. So this one is a non-selective enriched media used for the isolation and identification of fastidious pathogens. So ulitin po natin, no, enriched na ito dahil may blood components din siya, and it is for fastidious organisms na kailangan ng nutrient source na matatagpuan lang natin sa looban ng RBCs. Okay? So keep in mind, no, that not as the name implies, hindi porket may chocolate sa pangalan ng chocolate agar plate ay may chocolate din na component nito. The chocolate agar plate does not contain any amount or percentage of chocolate. Okay? Huwag pong kakalimutan yan. Alright? So it does not contain any amount or percentage of actual edible chocolate. So bakit ba siya tinawag na chocolate agar? The chocolate agar is prepared by heating the blood agar, no, which in turn would rupture the RBCs and release the nutrients present inside the intact RBCs that would aid in the growth of fastidious bacteria. Okay, ulitin po natin ang preparation po ng chocolate agar. Instead of just including, no, yung 5% sheep blood dun sa culture media mo, iinitin mo din siya, iinitin mo yung mixture mo para ma-hemolyze yung RBCs. Pag na-hemolyze yung RBCs, may mga nutritional source sa looban ng RBCs na mapupunta sa labas at mai-incorporate doon sa culture media, which is very good for the isolation of fastidious organisms because ngayon, may access na sila doon sa nutrients na nasa looban ng RBCs. Alright? So, after heating the RBCs, they would become hemolyzed and it would release the nutrients needed in the growth of the fastidious bacteria, producing the chocolate brown color. Okay? So at least now you know, no? Walang laman, walang component na chocolate ang chocolate agar, no? Pero yung kulay niya kasi, kakulay niya yung chocolate dahil hinimolize na natin yung RBCs, diba? So ayun po, no? The only another difference between the CAP and the BAP is hindi na natin pwedeng gamitin yung CAP to observe hemolytic patterns. Okay? 'Di ba kanina sinabi ko, yung blood agar plate, pwede mong gamitin to observe hemolytic patterns kasi yung RBCs intact pa sila. So yung bacteria, pwede pa niyang sirain yung RBCs na nandun sa BAP. Pero hindi na natin pwedeng gamitin ang CAP to observe hemolysis dahil hemolyze na, di ba? Hemolyze na, sira na yung mga RBCs na nasa looban ng CAP. So, hindi na magiging useful ito to observe hemolytic patterns of some bacteria dahil hemolyze na nga in advance yung RBCs. Okay? So, ayun po, no? I hope you understood the difference between BAP and CAP. Next is the McConkey agar. So, the McConkey agar was the first solid differential media to be formulated, which was developed in the 20th century by Alfred Theodore. Alright, so ang McConkey agar po, this is a selective and differential media that is used in the isolation and differentiation of non-fastidious gram-negative rods, particularly members po of the family Enterobacteriaceae. Okay, just a quick review, kapag may Aceae sa dulo nung pangalan nung binabasa natin, ang ibig sabihin, family ang pinag-uusapan natin. Okay, so ulitin po natin, no? The McConkey agar is a selective and differential media for the isolation and differentiation of family members of Enterobacteriaceae. So this differentiation is mainly based on the bacteria's capability to ferment lactose or not. Okay? So makikita natin nakalista po dito, no, yung nutrient source, carbohydrate source, and inhibitory agents. Alright? So yung carbohydrate source niya na lactose monohydrate, no, yan yung carbohydrate source ng organisms na i-grow natin sa media na to. Next naman po is yung bile salts and crystal violet. Yung bile salts and crystal violet, those are the inhibitory agents. It's supposed to inhibit the growth of gram-positive organisms. Okay? So, puro mga gram-negative bacilli lang ang tutubo dito sa McConkey agar. That is possible dahil ang bile salts at crystal violet, pinigilan niya ang pagtubo ng mga gram-positive organisms. Alright? So, paano natin makikita yung differential capabilities niya? For the organisms that were capable of fermenting lactose, their colonies appear pink. Okay, as we can see right here in these examples. But if the organism is lactose fermenter, colorless lang po yung colonies nila. Alright, so that's for the McConkey agar. Let's now proceed with the bacterial growth curve. Let us first familiarize ourselves with these terminologies para po mas madali nating maintindihan yung bacterial growth curve. The generation time of bacteria in a culture can be as quick as 20 minutes for fast-growing bacteria such as Escherichia coli, or as long as 24 hours for slow growers like Mycobacterium tuberculosis. When we use the word generation, this refers to the doubling of the cell number. So kung gaano man karaming bacterial cells yung mayroon initially dun sa sample, times 2. Okay? So yun po yung generation. Now, when we say generation time, this is also referred to as the doubling time. This is the amount of time required for bacteria to double their population. Alright? So, gaano katagal bago sila maging times 2 sa dami. Next, transverse fission naman po. This is the most common form of cell division for bacterial cells. Okay? Again, transverse binary fission is the most common form of cell division among bacterial cells. So, kaya po dumodoble, no, yung population nila is because they undergo transverse binary fission. Now that we know those terminologies, let's discuss the 4 stages of bacterial growth. First is the lag phase, or the period of rejuvenescence. So, during this time, no cell division occurs. 0. Okay, so the bacteria is still adjusting to its new environment. Okay, so may adjustment period din po yung mga bacteria. So, while in the lag phase, the bacterial cells only begin to biosynthesis. There is no change yet in their cell mass or number. Hindi pa sila dumodoble in number and hindi pa sila lumalaki in terms of size. The next is the log phase, otherwise referred to as the logarithmic phase or exponential phase. So this is now where the bacterial cells are actively growing and dividing. Okay? So ito rin po yung best time for us to collect samples for biochemical testing. Alright? Ulitin po natin dito sa log phase or exponential phase, nag-i-increase in size and increase in number na rin po yung bacterial cells. And ulitin natin, if we would like to perform biochemical testing, it's more recommended na sa logarithmic phase po tayo mag-collect ng samples. Alright? So based on experience po, no, medyo hindi na po kasi accurate yung nagiging test results and yung staining reactions nila kapag luma na yung pinanggalingan na culture. Third is the stationary phase, otherwise referred to as the plateau phase. So this is where there is a balance or equilibrium between cell division and cell death. Alright? So again, sa stationary phase po, pantay na yung dami ng mga bagong bacterial cells that are being produced and the old bacterial cells that are dying. Alright? So literally there is an equilibrium. So that is the stationary phase. Alright? So during this time po, no, during this time, the metabolic activities of the surviving cells begin to slow down and the nutrients in the culture media are becoming limited kasi po syempre nagamit na siya ng mga unang cells na produce. Okay, so again, that's for the stationary phase. Fourth is the death phase or decline phase. All right, so this is where the bacterial growth and reproduction stops. All right, and the number of dying cells are greater than those that are still surviving. Also, dito rin po, there's already not a lot of nutrients that is left, and there has been an accumulation of toxic materials or toxic waste dahil those have been formed as all the other bacterial cells are aging and are dying. All right, so the accumulation of toxic waste further contributes to the death of the remaining cells. So on the next slide, let's look at a graph. Now let's look at a graph that would help us understand yung bacterial growth curve. So this slide shows us a visual representation of the 4 stages of bacterial growth. And again, we call this as the bacterial growth curve. So the lag phase, yung una po, this is the adjustment period. Okay? Next is the exponential phase. The bacterial cells are now constantly doubling. Next is the stationary phase. So there is now an equal number of new cells being formed and old cells that are dying. And lastly, at the death or decline phase, no new cells are being created and not much nutrients is available. So more cells are dying and more toxic waste are accumulating. All right. So again, this is the bacterial growth curve depicting the 4 different stages of bacterial growth. Let's now talk about bacterial biochemistry and metabolism. Now, in this segment of our discussion, we will be focusing on the basics of respiration and fermentation. Respiration is an efficient ATP generating process wherein glucose is broken down. So ito po yung process na kayang gawin ng mga obligate aerobes and facultative anaerobes. Okay, ulitin po natin. Respiration is performed by obligate aerobes and facultative anaerobes. Okay, so first up, we have right here glycolysis. So glycolysis is also known as the Embden-Meyerhof-Parnas pathway, and this is the first stage in carbohydrate metabolism and is the major route of glucose metabolism in most cells. Okay, so hindi lang po sa bacteria. During this process, glucose is oxidized to pyruvic acid. Next is the tricarboxylic cycle or the Krebs cycle. All right. So this one is the most important process for the complete oxidation of a substrate under aerobic conditions. So definitely po, hindi ito kaya ng mga obligate anaerobic organisms. All right? So this enzyme system would convert pyruvate, and then by the end of the very long and confusing process of the Krebs cycle, energy is generated in the form of ATP or adenosine triphosphate. So again, those are the processes that are involved in the respiration, which is performed by obligate aerobes and facultative anaerobes. Let's proceed to fermentation. So fermentation are the processes that do not require oxygen. So ito po yung mga forms of bacterial metabolism na kayang gawin ng mga obligate anaerobes, facultative anaerobes, and aerotolerant anaerobes. Okay? So medyo madami po sila, pero ang pinakailangan natin tandaan dito is kung ano-ano yung mga end products nila. Okay? So may mga highlight naman po yung important, kumbaga parang keywords na kailangan natin tandaan. So first is alcoholic fermentation. Alcoholic fermentation utilizes glucose to produce ethanol. Alright? So maliban po sa mga anaerobic bacteria, kaya rin po itong gawin ng mga fungi and protozoans. Alright? So again, ang end product ng alcoholic fermentation ay ethanol. Next is homolactic fermentation. So as the name implies, pyruvate is reduced to lactic acid and lactic acid only. Okay, ang produkto lang ng homolactic fermentation ay lactic acid lang. Okay, let's compare that to heterolactic fermentation. All right, so in heterolactic fermentation, the end product is lactic acid and also acetic acid and also formic acid together with alcohol and carbon dioxide. So there are multiple different acids that are being produced in heterolactic fermentation. All right. Next is mixed acid fermentation. So sa mixed acid fermentation po, its end products include acetic, formic, lactic, and succinic acid without alcohol or gas. Alright, ulitin po natin sa mixed acid fermentation, ang pinagkaiba nito sa heterolactic fermentation, walang alcohol at walang carbon dioxide sa mixed acid fermentation. Pero sa heterolactic, maliban dun sa listahan ng mga acids, mayroon ding alcohol and carbon dioxide. Alright, so ayun po. Malalaman natin na mixed acid fermenter ang isang organism kapag nag-positive po siya sa methyl red test. So, you'll be talking more about the methyl red test pagdating niyo po sa laboratory classes niyo. Next is the butanediol fermentation. So, butanediol fermentation po, pyruvate is converted to acetone, and again, as the name implies, 2,3-butanediol. So, nasa pangalan naman na po niya yung end product niya, diba? So, malalaman po natin na butanediol fermenter ang isang organism kapag nag-positive naman siya sa Voges-Proskauer test. Alright? So, again, that's something that you will learn and be able to perform in your lab classes. Do take note, though, that medically significant bacteria could be positive for either methyl red or Voges-Proskauer, but never both. Okay? Ulitin natin, pwede pong parehas na negative sila sa MRVP, pwedeng mag-positive sila sa MR, pwedeng mag-positive sila sa VP, pero hindi po nangyayari na ang clinically significant bacteria na to ay positive for both MR at VP. Okay? Tatandaan nyo po yan. Dapat alam nyo yung impormasyon na yan pagdating nyo sa lab class nyo. Okay? Clinically significant bacteria could be positive for either MR or VP, but not for both. Okay? So, ayan po. There are other bacteria out there, na positive sila sa parehas na MR or VP. Pero hindi kasi sila clinically significant for humans, so we don't really talk about them. Okay? So, ayan po. Alright? So, ayan. Actually, some online sources have stated that there are some serraceous species that could produce both a positive MR and VP. But as a general rule po, yung medically significant bacteria, isa lang sa dalawang ito ang kaya nilang i-positive. So, it's either mixed acid fermenter lang sila or butanediol fermenter lang sila. Alright, you'll talk more about that when you get to your laboratory classes. Now, last one is the butyric acid fermentation. And as expected, kasama po sa end products niya ang butyric acid. So, ayun po, no? Listed here or discussed here are the different fermentation pathways of the different anaerobes. So again, kumbaga, no, although maraming byproducts yung iba sa kanila, ang kailangan natin tandaan ay kung ano yung mga unique na byproducts nila. Alright? And listed here are the examples na rin po. Which organisms, no, are capable of going through which specific form of fermentation. On to the last segment of our discussion, let's proceed to bacterial genetics. The bacterial chromosome is also referred to as its genome. So this genome consists of one closed circular piece of DNA that is supercoiled to fit inside the cell, as you can see right here in this photo to the left. So bale, isang malaking loop lang po yung DNA na yan, but it is coiled very tightly para magkasya sa looban ng bacterial cell. So now it looks like that. It looks like that crumpled thing, diba? So ayun po. Maliban dito sa pinaka-genome nila, they also have what are referred to as plasmids. Okay? So plasmids are additional information in one small circular piece of extra chromosomal double-stranded DNA. Now, these plasmids are not essential for bacterial growth, so okay lang if they don't have plasmids. But they could also lose this along the way. Pero genes that would encode for things such as antimicrobial resistance, toxin production, and other virulence factors are located in these plasmids. Okay, so ulitin po natin, no? For some bacterial organisms, their capability to be resistant to antimicrobials or produce toxins or have other virulence factors are encoded within those plasmids. And again, yung plasmids po, yung nakikita natin dito na circular-shaped DNA. Now, what are the different mechanisms of gene transfer among bacterial cells? First is transformation. Transformation is the uptake of free DNA that is released into the environment when another bacterial cell dies, either by cell lysis or disintegration, which causes a rupture in the cell wall, as you can see right here in this GIF. So, just an example, no? Does anybody here play PUBG? No? Or any other games with the same rules as PUBG? So, di ba kapag may player doon na namatay, no, when one of the players die, you can loot their bag, diba? You can take their things and sa'yo na yon after this person dies, diba? So parang ganun po yung konsepto ng transformation, alright? So when one bacterial cell dies, another bacterial cell could encounter that or stumble upon it, and they can take the DNA that has been released in its immediate surrounding. Okay, so literal na namatay itong bacteria na to at nilulute nung isa pang bacteria yung DNA niya. Alright? So after taking that free DNA, they can now incorporate this into their own genetic sequence by undergoing recombination. Next mechanism of gene transfer is transduction. Alright? So as we can see right here, transduction is the transfer of bacterial genes by a bacteriophage. Now, what is a bacteriophage? A bacteriophage is a virus that can primarily infect bacteria. Okay, ulitin po natin, ang mga bacteriophage, mga virus po sila na ang preferred host cell nila ay bacteria. Alright, so as you can see right here in this GIF, no, that's how it usually happens. So, ang ginagawa po nito, the bacteriophage will infect one bacterial cell. And let's say, for example, yung bacterial cell na yun, it carries the gene for antimicrobial resistance, no? So, bale, ang mangyayari is, kukunin niya yung plasmid, no? Kukunin niya yung plasmid that carries the genetic sequence for antimicrobial resistance, and pagkatapos niya pong mag-replicate, chances are, na-incorporate niya sa sarili niyang genetic sequence yung plasmid that encodes for antimicrobial resistance. So now, new copies of this bacteriophage will move on to infect another bacterial cell that is nearby. And kung wala pa sila nung genetic code for antimicrobial resistance, this bacteriophage could pass it on to them as well. So that's what happens during transduction. All right? Ulitin po natin, no? A bacteriophage would infect a bacteria that carries the genetic sequence for antimicrobial resistance. After the virus replicates, it bursts out of the host cell and then it begins to infect other cells nearby. Kung yung mga cells na yon nearby ay wala pa nung genetic sequence that codes for antimicrobial resistance, ipapasa ito sa kanila nung bacteriophage. Alright, so that's how transduction happens. Alright, this is mainly brought about by a bacteriophage. Next is conjugation. So conjugation is also known as horizontal gene transfer, which happens when a living donor cell transfers its own genome to another bacterial cell with the use of its pilus. So remember po, di ba, na-discuss natin kanina yung conjugation pili. So yun po yung trabaho nito. Okay? It serves as a conjugative bridge to be a channel for DNA to be transferred. So literally using its conjugation pilus, iaabot ng isang bacterial cell yung DNA niya to another bacterial cell. And yung DNA po na yun would be transferred, ayun nga po, to the other bacterial cell that is nearby. All right? So again, that's for conjugation. On this slide, we have illustrations on how each mechanisms of gene transfer would work. First, for transduction, a bacteriophage infects a bacterial cell and passes on the genome that it has acquired from previous bacterial cells that it has infected. Next is conjugation. A bacterial cell uses its conjugation pili to pass on its genetic material to another bacterial cell. This is otherwise referred to as horizontal gene transfer. Next, for transduction, a living bacterial cell takes up the free genetic material that has been released by a dead bacterial cell. So again, those are the three mechanisms of gene transfer for bacterial organisms. This ends our discussion on Chapter 1 of Mahon Diagnostic Microbiology, which talks about the bacterial structure, physiology, metabolism, and genetics. This has been Aurel Enriquez. Thank you so much for watching.